All right, everybody, back with another video. I am on baby duty, so don't mind my little girl. Um, this video is going to be on the topic of biblical slavery, biblical slavery properly understood, because there is a lot of misunderstanding regarding biblical slavery, and I'm going to have a lot of monologues when there's no one to speak to, because I'm going to open up my TikTok here so that people can come up and interact with that prompt. But what I'm also going to ensure is that for all of you on YouTube watching, what I'm going to ensure is that I'm losing my train of thought. I forgot what I was saying because I was distracted. So I'm going to be going live, and I'm going to be ensuring that people understand biblical slavery, dealing with the objections and responding to the objections, so that you, the listener, and everyone who comes up on my page on TikTok, you, the listener, and them, and that they understand. Let me see if I can. Let's reason. Biblical slavery properly understood. Why are you trying to grab my laptop keyboard, huh? Don't do that. All right, play with this. Hold on to this. There you go. No, don't do that. All right, go and play on the floor. I'll pick you back up when you're tired of playing on the floor. All right, baby girl. Here is a biscuit. There you go. There you go. All right. I need to make this smaller. Need to make that smaller. Need to make the picture smaller, and I gotta turn this up this side here. All right. The picture is too big. Everybody on YouTube, my TikTok name is Adrian King. So just look for me on TikTok if you ever want to have a conversation about my topics. Save to photos. All right, let me use that one instead. There we are. Okay. Let's reason. Biblical slavery properly understood. All right. So my mission is to have Christians and non-Christians properly understand biblical slavery, because there's a lot of misunderstanding on that topic. So here are, and I'm writing a book on it, so it's pretty useful to use the arguments that I have. Hey, come on. It's pretty useful to use the arguments that I have from the book that I'm writing about this. So let's see here. core argument. All right, so from the earliest centuries, Christians, bishops, emperors, laity, and church councils actively desired the end of slavery and worked toward its reduction through responsible manumission. They did not practice or endorse reckless, instantaneous abolition because they understood the practical realities of a fallen world. When sudden abolition finally occurred in the 19th century, Britain, 1833, and United States, 1865, it caused significant economic and social hardship, both for former slave owners and former slaves. Wow, this guy literally, this person on TikTok literally said, "That's a cool baby, how much to buy it?" I don't know if this individual is joking or is being serious. If he's being serious, then that's an instant block. But if he's joking, then, jokes can fly. What's wrong, honey bun? What's wrong? What's wrong? All right, so the Christians' approach throughout history was wiser. Treat slaves with justice and fairness, limit abuse, and free them responsibly when it was possible and fitting after preparing them for independent life. So, where does this all come from? No name. Are you joking or are you being serious? Because if you're being serious, you're blocked. Are you being serious? Just let me know so I can decide what I'm going to do with you. Just let me know. I can simply block you. It's very easy. It's a hit of a button. Are you being serious or are you joking? Okay, he's not responding. Okay, so Colossians chapter 4, verse 1, it says, "Masters, grant to your slaves justice and fairness, knowing that you too have a master in heaven." The church fathers understood justice and fairness as including humane treatment, protection from cruelty, and encouragement of manumission. That is, voluntary freeing of slaves as a pious and praiseworthy act. However, they did not interpret this verse as a universal command requiring immediate and mandatory emancipation of all slaves. Slavery was an institution and it was accepted as a post-fall reality, while Christian masters were called to higher standards of justice. So whenever the church fathers commented on Colossians 4, verse 1, they understood treating your slaves with justice and fairness meant to free them responsibly, in that you let the slaves go free, but you do so without the slave's detriment. Okay, you want to go to sleep. You want to go to sleep. I can see. I'm going to put you to bed, okay? I'll put you to bed and then come back online, okay? Is that a good deal? What do you think, Ellie? What do you think? What do you think? Okay, let's put you to sleep and then come back. I'm going to come back, guys. I got to put the baby to sleep. All right, I'm going to pause this video. I'll be right back, YouTube. Just stay right there. Well, it's gonna only be like a split second because I'm gonna cut the video. I'll be right back. Okay, so back. Back. All right, so I open this and people come up. I ask them what they think biblical slavery is, how they understand biblical slavery, what they understand biblical slavery to be, and then I make the corrections where necessary. All right, so back on the live on TikTok, and what I was saying was that biblical slavery, properly understood, is to recognize the biblical and historical evidence pointing to the fact and the reality that Christians have always desired the abolition of slavery. They always desired the freedom of slaves. But because the economy was so dependent on slavery, if slavery was abolished instantly, there would be consequences within that time period. And this is actually shown in that when slavery was actually abolished in 1833 in England and 1865 in America, what followed was economic turmoil. Former slave owners went bankrupt, and former slave owners in America went bankrupt. Those who depended on the cotton market, they went bankrupt. So poor white former slave owners suffered. And more importantly, former slaves in America suffered. Hunger, homelessness, exploitation, and starvation. What should have happened, what they should have done when slavery was abolished, because in England they paid off the former slave owners when they abolished slavery. And in America, they did it instantly, and they shouldn't have done that. What they should have done was two options. Either they gradually free all slaves until eventually all slavery is done with, all slavery is finished, and all slaves are free in the Western world. Or they abolish slavery instantly and they pay off all the slaves. Reimburse or reparations, or the reparations they should have given to all former slaves proper compensation for all of the forced labor that they all went through, so that they had a means to be independent after being freed from slavery. The former slave owners, they had a better means of rebuilding themselves, but not the slaves. Slaves had no means of rebuilding themselves after they were just set free. They suffered, and eventually they did pick themselves up because they were unified and they had community. And eventually, in the 1960s, I believe, the black race in America were unified and they were, independent. But just to look at this historical fact, in that Christians always, this is documented in history, they always wanted the freedom of all slaves, but they knew the practical reality of freeing all slaves instantly. So what they would do is they would encourage the freedom of slaves. And where they could, they would be a means of freeing slaves in a community and in a culture where slavery was universal. And here is their interpretation on Colossians 4 and verse 1. So first we're going to have John Chrysostom commenting on Colossians 4 verse 1. He says, Grant to your slaves justice and fairness. This means do not treat them with cruelty, do not overburden them, and where possible, grant them freedom. For you also have a master in heaven. Augustine of Hippo, he said, in commenting on Colossians chapter 4, verse 1, Masters, give your slaves what is just and fair. This includes this includes feeding them properly, not beating them excessively, and liberating them when it is fitting. Remember, you are all slaves of the one true master. And I'm going to read one more before I bring up this request. Ambrose of Milan, commenting on Colossians 4, verse 1. Justice to slaves means treating them as human beings made in God's image. Many Christians' masters have rightly set their slaves free as an act of mercy and piety. All right, so the logical problem of evil. Okay.
Hey, what's going on, man?
I'm doing all right. Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfectly.
All right. How do you understand biblical slavery?
I'm pretty. I don't know much of what it says in the New Testament. What the New Testament authors have to comment on it. From what I've read about the verses of slavery in the Old Testament, it seems to be that there is two different types of slaves, you had kind of bond servantry and then slavery, and you'd see the Hebrew slaves or the Israelite slaves, they would be held until they paid off a debt, essentially, bond servantry. But what we see with the foreigner slaves, we see them being held indefinitely as property, which I would call slavery. Do you agree with that assessment, or did I go wrong somewhere?
I agree.
Okay, yeah, and there's not a lot, obviously, written about slavery in the Old Testament, so there is speculation and there is some interpretation, but from what I've read, from what I've seen, especially, it seems that there was a different classification of treatment for actually, I don't want to. That's a little bit too much speculation. It seems to me that it's weird in the chapter that we see. I mean, Leviticus 25. It says for the foreigner. I'm going to paraphrase harshly here, but it says something like your own fellow Hebrew slave, you may not treat them ruthlessly. Indirectly saying you may treat the foreigner slaves ruthlessly, which, I mean, we should, if we're taking this, system of slavery to be one of, holiness, and this is God's, system, and he's setting up in a way for it to be better than how we humans would do it, it seems weird for God to add a stipulation, you may not treat your own slaves, your own fellow Hebrew slaves ruthlessly, indirectly saying the other slaves, you may treat them ruthlessly.
Yeah, I totally get what you're saying. I think that when we read these passages, we have to look at the rabbinic literature, which is the commentary on the entire Tanakh, verse by verse, and also the patristic writings, which is the entire commentary on the entire Bible from the Christian bishops and church fathers. When we look at their interpretation of this passage, Leviticus chapter 24, verse 44 to 46, they understood this passage to mean a limited command for how the Israelites were supposed to treat the 7 nations of the Canaanites, in that they were allowed to enslave the Canaanites and pass down those Canaanites' children to their children perpetually. And perpetually has to be focused on a little bit. It's the Hebrew word olam, which means forever, which means for an age, which means for a duration of time. And when you look at that along with the other evidence in the Bible, it turns out that it was not a literal forever, but rather for the children of those individuals who were enslaved in Canaan. And yes, there was a distinction with how you were to treat the Israelites, your fellow neighbors, and how you were to treat the Canaanites. But there were commands given where the Israelites were not allowed to abuse any foreigner. They were not allowed to abuse them. And if they did, then they had to let the foreigner go as a result of the permanent damage. And also, they were not allowed to unalive them, because if they did, they would get the death penalty. So it's just understanding the writings and the interpretation of these passages to properly understand biblical slavery.
Yeah, so the first part, I'll respond to your first point about olam. So it can mean, it doesn't necessarily have to mean forever, right? But in the context of when we read that verse, when it says you may pass them on to your children and your children's children, this obviously signifies to me a owning of that person until that person eventually dies, because you're owning them for olam, and you're also transferring them to your children and your children's children. It seems to me an ownership until death.
Yes, it is an ownership until they pass away. But what we have to also ensure is that we don't interpret the text to mean the Canaanites' children and the Canaanites' grandchildren and their grandchildren and their grandchildren and all the way down, but rather it was to own the Canaanites as slaves and their children, you pass them down, and that was where it was limited to. And the reason why this is the case, and the reason
to clarify,
yeah.
It's for the Hebrew, so the Hebrew can the Hebrew can transfer his property, his slave, his foreign slave, to his children, not like he can't take the foreigner's children.
Well, actually, that's what it says. It says the foreigner's children. I'm going to read it. I'm going to show you what I mean. Okay, Leviticus 25, verse 44 to 46. That's why the prompt is biblical slavery properly understood, because I understand that there are a lot of misunderstandings out there about these things. It says, as for your male and female slaves whom you may have, you may acquire male and female slaves from the pagan nations that are around you. You may also acquire them from the sons of the sojourners who reside among you. This is from their children who reside among you. And you may even bequeath them to your sons after you to receive as a possession. You can also use
your sons.
Yeah, bequeath them to your sons. Yes, so bequeath them to your sons, them and their children, which is limited to that particular generation. And the reason why we know this is because when you look at the rest of Scripture, when the Canaanites were in the land during the generation of Joshua, who came after Moses, they lived among the Israelites without being oppressed and without being enslaved, which points to the fact that it was limited to the conquest, or limited to the time of the conquest.
Wait, sorry, can you repeat that? You were lagging out on my side.
Yeah, I was saying that we have biblical evidence showing that it was limited to that generation, because in the generation of Joshua, when the conquest already took place in the generation of Moses, Joshua had living among him Canaanite nations who he did not enslave. And also we have evidence in the New Testament of a Canaanite woman who went up to Jesus. This woman was free, not hunted by Israelites to be enslaved, nor having her enslavement to the Israelites, in that it was limited to a generation.
That can be reconciled with, it's not a mandate in the verse. It's not, you must take these people as slaves. It's, you can own these people. You can for the male and from the the sojourner's son, you can take them as a slave. It's not like a mandate, so I don't necessarily see the problem with that. It's a law permitting you to do the thing. It's not a law saying you must do the thing. So to see a Canaanite or a group of Canaanite people, later, that aren't enslaved, can just be reconciled with, it's not mandatory for you to enslave these people according to the verse.
Right. And that's how a lot of people interpret it, to mean mandatory enslavement of all generations and all people. We have to understand the history behind all of this. That was written in the ancient Near East, and the New Testament documents, it was written within the Roman Empire. And both of those cultures and societies depended heavily, their economy depended heavily on slavery. Slavery was a universal thing where everyone had, every generation, or rather every ethnic group, was enslaved at some point because the entire economy depended on that. And immediate abolishment of slavery would not be practical. It would literally result in starvation, economic collapse, and all of that. And we actually have evidence of that happening in England and in America when the
Yes.
abolition of slavery actually took place, in that they should not have done that immediately. They should have, one, either gradually let the slaves go, or two, after letting all the slaves go, give them compensation. Give them
I feel like this
compensation.
talking point completely falls flat when we're talking in the context of an all-powerful God. It's not the fact that slavery was economically necessary or even necessary at all for the economy or whatever, because God could have allowed any other sort of system, such as like feudalism, where you're not owned as property for life per se, but it's more akin to bond servantry, where you're paid a lease off of like to a land, like a contract where you'll work on the land until your debt is paid, for example. So owning another human is never economically necessary. There's always economic alternatives to chattel slavery. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would agree, but that is how the cultures of that time decided to make their economy dependent. They chose slavery to be their economic dependence. That's what they did.
Yeah, and then God looked at this system. He was like, okay, this system's not that bad. Let's tell Moses, let's tell Moses to tell the Israelites to keep doing it.
Well, I wouldn't even interpret it to be we have this all powerful God who desperately wanted slavery to end, but he just simply allowed it because he had no choice. I'm a Presbyterian. I believe that God ordains all things that take place in time. There is no such thing as free will where your will is free from God's determination. There is no free will in my system. So every single thing that God ordains and decrees in time is ultimately for his glory. And even the Christian's relationship with Jesus Christ, the Bible describes every Christian as a slave of Christ. And this does not end after we pass away. The eternal state in Revelation, it speaks about us being his slaves perpetually. And the reason why God ordained slavery is the same reason he ordains everything, for his glory. And we see the reason for slavery in that we have a picture where we have a slave master and a slave, and we know what that looks like with reference to Christ. The same way marriage is a reflection of God and his relationship with the church, slavery is a reflection of Christ and his relationship to his slaves. So I'm not of the opinion, logical problem of evil, that God wanted slavery to end, but he simply allowed it because man had free will. It was rather the case that God wanted there to be slavery, and that's why there was slavery. The same reason why there is any evil in the world. Any evil in the world is because God wants there to be evil in the world.
Yeah, okay. Would you say there's any, I don't know how to put this. I mean, the simplest way I could put it, do you think it's a bad thing for one human to own another human as property for life? Do you think that's inherently bad?
When you say for life, you mean until the person passes away, the slave itself?
Yes.
I would say it is not a good thing because it is God's ideal for there to be freedom and liberty of every human being. And we see this in the writings of the church, the desire of the church, the desire of every Christian, in that it is historically documented that Christians who had slaves during the first few hundred years of the church, they were encouraged and also encouraged others to let their slaves go free. And we have evidence from monasteries where monks and abbots used church funds after getting approval by bishops to go and buy slaves just so that they could free them. So Christians have always desired the freedom of slaves, and it was always viewed to be not God's ideal for a man or a woman to be enslaved for the rest of their life. But if they are enslaved, the Christian or the individual should treat that slave with love, dignity, and respect, and always seek responsible manumission. What's that? You make sure that when you let the slave go free, you don't let them go without any means of independence, because that would lead to their detriment, starvation, and exploitation.
I understand. I kind of want to keep it in the context of the Old Testament, the Old Testament time. You said you as a Presbyterian, your belief is that, you know, everything that God enacts, you know, he does it in order to, or like, I can't put, sorry, what did you specifically say? You said, like, what makes God's glory, what adds to God's glory? You said everything that, like everything that occurs, did you say? Like, you know, there is no evil because, you know, he creates everything. So sorry,
No,
I know.
It's okay. I can repeat myself.
Yeah.
Everything that God ordains is for his glorification, not to add to his glory, but to display his glory. And what I said about the Old Testament passages, I forgot what your question was. You were getting at something.
Yeah. So everything God ordains is according to his glory. It shows his glory. Do you agree that God ordained the system of owning another human as property for life?
Yeah, I believe that. And it was to reflect. Oh, hold on. There's a call coming in. Hold on. Damn. I'm using my phone, and when a call comes in, I have to, stop the video. Sorry about that. All right. Oh my goodness, I forgot what you asked. What did you say?
So everything that God ordains displays his glory. God ordained the system of owning another human as property for life, yet you claim that system to be a bad system. So how would God's glory be displayed through a bad system?
The bad system. God's glory is displayed through a bad system because he can show the opposite of that system and its correct picture. So I could use an example like, let's use the example of what God ordained. Let me see. Okay, I'm going to use slavery since it's the topic. The bad system of owning another human being perpetually, where the human being's dignity would be compromised. God ordained that bad thing so that he could show his glory in the correct way of doing it, which is Christ's relationship with the church, where Christ, as the master and Lord of all his slaves in Christendom, treats his slaves with love, dignity, respect, and discipline, exemplifying the true and right way of doing it. But no human being can ever do it the way Christ does it. And that is why to free your slave is what is ideal, not to enslave them.
It seems to me kind of, because this is why I want to stay in the Old Testament context. It seems to me kind of silly. So I understand where you're going with this. I've heard this before, where God allows something bad to happen in order to later show you the good, because you can argue how would you ever see there would be no bravery without evil, for example. There's some things you can't have without the bad.
Yeah, but I wouldn't say God allows. I would say God decrees and ordains it. Like, for example, the unalivement of a 4-year-old by a drunk driver. And that drunk driver goes to prison, comes back out, and starts a rehabilitation center and saves a lot of people from becoming drunk drivers. the child's passing away was evil, but God ordained the evil to bring about a good. And you see the contrast between the evil and the good. And you would not know the contrast unless you had seen the evil or known about the evil. So that is in our system. But I never say allow. I say decreed and ordained purposely by God.
Do you take it every action on earth that has occurred from the actions of humans to be something that God ordained?
Every action, every thought, every evil, every sin has been decreed by God. And I want to make sure that I read something to you before I dig myself into a hole here, because other Christians are watching this on YouTube right now. Acts chapter 4, verse 27 28. For truly in this city they were gathered together against your holy servant Jesus, whom you anointed, both Herod, Pontius Pilate, along with the Gentiles and the people of Israel, to do whatever your hand and your purpose predestined to occur. Within our system, as Presbyterians and as Christians on a whole, we believe that Jesus Christ was the only innocent human being who ever lived. But the Bible says clearly in Acts chapter 4, verse 27 through 28, that God decreed and ordained the unalivement of the only innocent human being who ever lived. If we can accept the greatest evil that ever took place in human history to be decreed and ordained by God, then no other form of evil, no other example of evil should be rejected as being ordained and decreed by God. When the Bible actually says in Ephesians chapter 1, verse 11, God works all things after the counsel of his will. And one last thing, Romans chapter 8, verse 28, God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God and are called according to his purpose. And let's not forget what Joseph said to his brothers after he was sold into slavery and all the bad things that happened to him. He told his brothers, you meant evil against me, but God meant the evil for good. So this is just within our worldview. You don't have to accept it because, people don't believe and some people aren't Christians. But in our worldview, we reconcile these things and we understand them. And slavery is one of those things God ordained for his ultimate purpose of glorifying himself by displaying his glory to his creatures.
It seems kind of like, I don't know how I want to put it. Like what we're doing. I mean, maybe I was going to go with silly, but I mean, that seems a little too strong. But it seems silly for God. So God always has had this notion that we see reflected in the New Testament. The best thing for you to do is free your slaves. But, if you do have slaves, treat them well, etc. You've proved that. You've given verses for that. It seems kind of silly for this is God's ideal, but yet he doesn't make it aware to humans or his own constituents for like 2,000 years, right? Maybe even longer, at least from the time of, when the Israelites were in the desert to Jesus being born. We don't get anything similar to that in the Old Testament, which is just kind of why I wanted to stick in the Old Testament context. Because, I don't understand how, if it's God's intention to, display his, sorry, what's the word? I keep blanking.
Displaying his glory.
Displaying his glory, sorry. Yeah, so displaying his glory, sure, right? That can make sense. But for you to say that his intention was, at the end of the day, like you said in the New Testament, there's verses that says, the best thing for you to do is leave your slave, free your slave, or, treat them well. Why doesn't he say anything about that for 2,000 years? Unless there's, something in the Old Testament that I'm missing.
All right, so let me respond very quickly. So there's in our theology, and even if this is not believed, and I'm just going to call you logical. I can't say the whole thing.
Yeah, that's right.
Even if it is not believed, because when I was much younger and I was questioning my faith and wondering, hey, is this true? I was looking for consistency. And if I found inconsistency, I would have a reasonable excuse to say, you know what, this doesn't make any sense. I'm going to look for consistency. Even if the consistency I find is hard to accept, I'm going to look for consistency. And what I'm going to tell you, you're going to see the consistency, but you're going to also find
it very problematic. I would bet, but I could be wrong. In our theology, which is derived from the Bible, we learn about God's ideal and the deviations from God's ideal. And within Calvinism or Reformed theology, Presbyterianism, we understand that God revealed his ideal and he decreed and ordained deviations from that ideal. And the reason why it's not a contradiction is because of the very definition of a contradiction. It has to meet three conditions. It has to meet the temporal condition, the semantic condition, and the categorical condition, meaning it has to be A and not A at the same time, in the same sense, in the same category. When God decreed, we have his prescriptive will, which is that which is revealed in his law, how you're supposed to treat your neighbor, how you're supposed to be, etc. It says, love your neighbor as yourself, all of that. And we have God's decreative will, which is when he decrees and ordains deviations from his prescriptive will. And one example, well, two examples I'm going to give. Incest. The Bible commands against incest. In Leviticus chapter 16, verse 6 through 18. But God decrees incest. We have Lot's daughters sleeping with him. And out of Lot's daughters, we have the production of a woman named Ruth generations later. And Ruth is the father of Jesse, Jesse the father of David, David the ancestor of Jesus. So we look at these evil actions that were ordained by God, and we're like, why did God ordain this evil action? And then you look, you see, but wait, if this didn't happen, then Jesus Christ would not have been here. So God showed his glory in that evil action. He decreed a deviation. And one last example, I have a lot of them, but I'm going to use this last one. Kidnapping. The Bible commands against kidnapping in Exodus chapter 21, verse 16. But God ordains the kidnapping of Joseph by his brothers and then being sold into slavery. And the reason why we know that this was ordained by God is because Joseph literally said to his brothers, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, for the purpose of saving many people alive. Because as you well know, God sent a famine. And if Joseph was not the prime minister of Egypt, then Joseph's brothers and the people who were living in Canaan at that time would not have survived the famine. So we bring this down to slavery now. God ordained the deviation of slavery in the Old Testament, which was evil, because we have the Israelites forcing people into slavery. We have Solomon forcing the Canaanites to do labor. We have these examples, and we can rightly point to them and say, these were deviations from God's ideal, but he decreed it and ordained it for a purpose. And to me, logical, that makes a lot of sense, even though I may not like it.
Let me go back to your analogy. So with the drunk driver and hitting the girl, and then later opening up a clinic where he saves a bunch of drunk drivers from doing the same thing. So in this scenario, it would be the prescription that maybe you shall not be inebriated, you shall not kill, for example, or just don't be dumb. So
right, or rather, the prescription, don't get drunk. But he got drunk, and this was ordained by God, and then God used this as a purpose.
And the decree was the man ended up hitting the little girl, and the reason for this decree was, or the justification for this decree was so that this man could open up a clinic and save countless numbers of little girls, such as the one he had accidentally hit that day, right? So it seems to so it goes prescription. Then there may be a decree that goes against that prescription, but ultimately it will be justified. That decree will always be justified. But when we relate that same kind of schema to slavery in the Bible, it seems so. The prescription is love your neighbor. The Israelites didn't really love their neighbor because they enslaved them, right?
Mhm.
So the decree is they enslaved their neighbor. The justification for this is in order for well, maybe explain that. I don't want to steel man it incorrectly.
Yes.
Can you explain the justification for the decree of Israelites enslaving their neighbors?
All right. So there is no justification with reference to, hey, it was good that they enslaved their neighbors. The decree is a decree for evil to happen. So it's not a justification for it. For example, I'm going to use something simple. God decrees that I steal ice cream. The action is evil. The action is evil. But the decree is not evil. And I'll tell you why. If I, for example, were the ultimate cause of John Doe stealing ice cream, or the ultimate cause of John Doe kidnapping Michael Jones, if I, as a human being, was the ultimate cause of that, I would be sinning. But if God is the ultimate cause of that, God would not be sinning. Why? Because he is above the law. We have this whole notion of ex lex, and we always talk about it. Hey, nobody's above the law. Of course, no human being is above the law. But God, when he made his law revealed to people, it was for people, for human beings. And to show you how God is consistent, when he actually became a human being in the person of Jesus Christ, he was obligated to keep the law, and he did so perfectly. And that is why the gospel is so amazing, in that when you trust in Jesus Christ for forgiveness, eternal life, that righteous record is imputed to you because your sin was imputed on him on the cross. So just to close this all out completely, the decree was to do evil, but the person who was decreeing the evil was not doing evil, and that's God. So it didn't justify it.
God mustn't be above his own values. Sure, he can be above the law, but I thought you claimed that one of his values was for all slaves to be free. Therefore, he should not, is he above his own values? I get that he can be above his own law, but he shouldn't be above his own values.
He's above his own law, and when you speak about his values, those values would be located in his prescriptive will, which is located in his law, which is to love your neighbor as yourself. That is his prescription. But he, and a lot more examples other than slavery, decreed the deviation from that law, or decreed the disobedience of that law. So I, as a Christian, can always point this out and say, God, in this instance and in that instance, decreed sin, ordained sin to fulfill his purpose. I'm going to give you an example, and you can bring this to any Christian that you probably meet up with any other time. And you could ask them, does God cause sin? They're probably going to say no right off the bat, because most Christians don't know their Bible. All you got to do is quote 1 Samuel chapter 21, which says that God's anger incited David to number the Israelites. And David later on realized that he did something wrong and repented of that sin. Who decreed the sin? Who caused him to sin? God. But what was God's purpose? God's purpose was to bring about judgment on the Israelites for their disobedience of his.
Is this the story of the survey that David took of the people, or the whatever you call it?
The census. The census, yeah. That passage literally says that God's anger incited David to number the Israelites. But that action of numbering the Israelites was a sinful action. How do we reconcile that in our system as Christian Presbyterians, Calvinists?
God punish David for that?
Yeah, actually,
all the Israelites.
David wasn't punished. David was pardoned, but all of the Israelites were punished for that action, for literally, having them being numbered. When you read the passage, David's punishment was him witnessing the angel of the Lord unaliving a lot of Israelites. And then he begged the Lord, don't unalive any more of them. And the angel of the Lord restrained the sword and stopped unaliving the Israelites. But why did God do that? Because the Israelites had a long history of idolatry. And God not only ordains sin, but he also holds people accountable for the sin that he ordains. This is the truth of the Bible. That sounds hard to believe. I know.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a little bit on me. It's a lot. I mean, I've never researched Presbyterian beliefs, so I mean, it's a lot to take in all at once.
Yeah, it all makes sense. It all makes sense. I mean, God is wise, and He decrees sin. He ordains sin for a purpose. Sometimes we see the direct reason why He ordains it and how He's glorified in it. And sometimes in our own lives, I'm sorry.
For a purpose
Yeah.
seems to me like justification, and usually the justification is like a greater good that happens because of the decree.
But it still did not justify the action, though. The action was still evil. It didn't justify the action. It just shows that there is no such thing as purposeless evil.
Yeah, well, that's what happens with a greater good scenario. So, for example, you know, I can that's gonna give you okay. Sure, I can unalive baby mustache man, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to get you banned. I can unalive baby mustache man for the greater good of, you know, saving 6 million people. But, you know, that doesn't change the fact that unaliving a baby is evil, right? So just because something leads to a greater good doesn't mean that action you took to lead to that greater good isn't any better. So, I mean, I agree with you there.
Yeah.
It seems that, like, you know, it still is. So it's definitely not a justification for the act. I mean,
Right.
actually, I might say it's a justification for the action because it leads to an overall greater good, which could justify. So, for example, you know, the trolley problem, I would be justified to switch the track with one person versus 5. That's justified because I save more lives.
That's in that's in utilitarianism.
Oh yeah, well, we might not agree on that. If you're a deontologist, you're not even touching that. Like, you're running away, right?
Oh no, I'm not running away. I would actually say that both actions are evil, both of them.
Yeah, so you're not doing anything, right?
No, I would. Okay, I forgot the exact scenario of the trolley problem. I think that one guy on the track.
You're in front of a lever.
You pull the lever. You save
There's
one
2
guy.
tracks.
Yeah.
There's 2 tracks. One track has 1 person on it. The other track is 5 people. You have the option to pull the lever, switch the train from running over the 1 person versus running over the 5. What do you do?
I'm gonna pull the lever so that it ran over the 1 person. And in my system, that action is a wrong action. Since you studied ethics and philosophy, you also know about this thing called absolutism and objectivism.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm an absolutist, and the objection to absolutism is this: if you are approached by someone running from soldiers, and you hide that person in your house, and the soldiers come to your house, and you are asked by the soldiers, "Did you see this person?" If you lie by saying you did not see the person, you save the person's life. If you tell the truth, you are a part of the causal chain that resulted in the person being unalived by the soldiers. What do you do as an absolutist? Well, you tell a lie. But does the lie find itself justified in being a good thing because you ended up saving someone's life? No, in absolutism, you have what is called a moral dilemma there, where both actions you take is still morally evil. It is up to you as the individual to pick which one of them you're going to do. And in Christianity, we call it a sin dilemma, where both actions you take will result in you committing a sin. It is up to you in that moment to decide which one of those sins is lesser in consequence, or a lesser sin, or a lesser evil. So in the trolley problem, I'm going to have the one guy pass away instead of the 5 people, because even though it's still a sin, less lives are going to be taken. Man, TikTok is so terrible when it comes on to how to word certain things. Man, at the end of the day, I'm going to save more lives by unaliving one guy versus 5, if you get what I'm saying. So it's still a sin, but it's a lesser sin in comparison.
Yeah, and when I say justification, I mean, I'm like, if I invoke the term justification, it doesn't mean that the action was justified. I mean, justification just means a reason, you know?
Okay,
so
I see.
I think you were getting caught up there.
Okay, if that's all you mean by justification, is that it's just a reason, then yeah. God's decree is justified in that every evil that happens, there is a reason for If that's all you mean. But if you mean justification means the action is good, then no. We don't teach that in our theology. The greater good situation where it's for the greater good, so therefore my action is justified. No, the action is not justified. It's not good. It's still evil in our system.
Yeah, I agree with you there, even though we probably don't agree on the belief. I mean, so, of course, yeah. So, okay, so the decree is going to be justified because God has a reason, right? A good reason, supposedly, for enacting this decree.
Yeah.
And this reason usually entails, it seems to me, like a greater good outcome. So, you hit the little girl while you're inebriated, but you open a clinic later to save, hundreds of little girls. So yeah. it seems to me usually a greater good outcome to justify the decree.
Yeah, and we would say in our system that God ordained that because he wanted to bring about the greater good of, the man starting a clinic and saving countless other little girls from being, unalived. But we never say that, hey, the act of the man was good because, hey, he ended up saving a lot of lives as a result. No, we don't say that. And I was thinking about this today where I had my little girl next to me. She just turned 1 the other day. And I was thinking to myself, if I was working at a train track and without me knowing, my little baby girl creeped away or crawled away and she's on the train track and there are 100 people in a train coming and all I have to do is pull a lever and the train would be deviated from hitting my daughter. But as a result, everybody on that train would pass away. What am I going to do? I could not say what I would do because I'm not in the situation. But what I think I would do, which could probably change if I'm in the actual situation, what I think I would do is save my daughter and face the death penalty by the government that I'm in for unaliving so many people on a train. I think that's what I would do. But it would still be wrong either way. If I save my daughter and unalive all the people on the train, it's still sin. If I unalive my daughter and save everybody on the train, it's still a sin. Either way I go, in our system, it's still sin. But I think I would save my daughter. I don't know what I would do in the situation, but I think I would save my daughter.
Yeah. So we agree there. It's interesting. I've talked to Christians who don't agree with that, which is interesting. But so to go back to what we were talking about, so the silly thing I was going to say is that, God's justification in regards to the decree of allowing, the Israelites to own, just people for life, right? The justification for that doesn't come until over 2,000 years after that decree has happened. So imagine the same scenario with the drunk driver and the little girl. But imagine, the institute that saves a lot of little girls doesn't open until, 2,000 years into the future. It seems kind of, do you get where I'm going?
Yeah. We actually have an answer for that in our theology. And when you read for many years Christian theology, you learn things that you never knew would come up, and then they come up. You're like, oh, I'm glad I read that. In Deuteronomy 29, verse 29, it says that the secret things belong to the Lord, but that which has been revealed belongs to us and our children. So when I look at that and I see, for example, the thing you brought up where it was not revealed until 2,000 years later, the reason why God decreed that slavery happen or ordained that slavery happen. God knew the reason why he let it happen, and God knew the purpose for why it happened. And when he decided to reveal it to us was totally and entirely up to him. And this can also be pointed to what happens in our lives as Christians. There are a lot of things that happened to me in the past that at the time it happened, I'm like, what the hell? God, why would you ordain something like that to happen to me? Oh my goodness. But then a few weeks later or a few months later, I'm like, oh, if that had not happened, then this would not have happened. I see now. So we don't immediately know the reason why every single time God ordains something. But we eventually know, and if we never know, Deuteronomy 29:29 says, what has been revealed belongs to you and your children. What has not been revealed belongs to God. The secret things belong to God.
Yeah, and that's an answer I'm all too familiar with. It just seems that God, it just seems that there is no like comprehensible greater good that would happen in the scenario where God has the greater good outcome for the decree of slavery to happen, maybe 100 years after, the Israelites first start owning, people as slaves versus it seems that God is morally culpable for allowing the over 2,000 years of this slavery, of this bad institution to occur, versus he could have just allowed 100 years, or maybe 10. You know what I mean? It seems that he's morally responsible for the thousands of years of prolonged, the prolonged bad institution, occurring.
And I totally understand where you're coming from in that the temptation is to blame God and say, hey, God, you are wrong for what you ordained and what you did. Or, God, you were wrong for doing this and doing that. The temptation is real. And whenever the accusation is brought upon God to say that God did something wrong and he decreed something wrong, a Christian could not say that about God, because the Christian, if he's consistent, would have to apply the law that God revealed to human beings for human beings to God, because we don't have a higher standard to go to. So we would have to appeal to the standard given to us by God and then judge God's actions by that standard. But if a Christian did that, the Christian would be contradicting his own worldview, because the law that they would be appealing to does not apply to God or excludes God from being judged by it. So the moment we make the action of including God by judging him according to the law that he excluded himself from, we contradict our worldview. But since there is no law that is above God that judges his actions, we could not say that God did anything wrong. We could only say that God, because he is good, then he does everything for good and does everything that is good. And the prescriptions that he has given to human beings for how we are to live our lives are not his example, but rather what he told us to do and how we are to live. Because if we were told, hey, follow my example, everybody, follow my example, then I could ordain sin, I could decree evil, I could cause wickedness for greater goods. But the Bible does not allow that.
Yeah, two things. I mean, I kind of just want to roll that back because taking the context of every action that happens that a man does is technically a decree or something that God ordains. Because I was taking the context of the Old Testament and the Hebrew slavery. I was taking that context. God tells Moses to tell the Israelites to do this, but because of your additional context saying that any action that a man does is technically, a decree that God makes. So, I mean, we don't even have to worry about, the 2,000 years. I mean, God has technically decreed slavery for, millennia, right? If we take into account that. So, I guess that argument kind of shifts a little bit with that context. It's kind of gets lost in the weeds, I guess. But,
not just the Israelites. Every form of slavery, every form of slavery, everywhere, universally decreed by God.
Which I didn't take that.
Yeah,
I didn't take that into account just now.
I'm not limiting it. I'm not limiting it to just the Israelites. Every form of slavery, decreed and ordained by God for a purpose, for a reason. And I want to also jump in on this as well. It is actually the logical entailment of a God who knows all things, buddy. It's a logical entailment. As a logical individual, if God knows everything and he knows what will happen when he creates the mustache man, but he does it anyway, and the excuse is, but hey, God gave the mustache man free will. Hey, buddy, God knew what the mustache man was going to do with his free will, but he still created the mustache man. It does not escape God does not escape being ultimately responsible or ultimately the cause for the action. For all the free willers out there, because there are Christians out there who believe in free will, and all they do is they say, hey, the evil person had free will, and they think that by saying free will they somehow absolve God. No, it doesn't work. That's a logical entailment. But let's look at the alternative. Let's say that God does not exist and God is not real. It is a logical entailment for every atheist to believe in determinism of some form, natural determinism at that. And in their determinism, every action they do is a chemical reaction that was caused by their environment or their upbringing. Everything they do is the result of a chemical reaction, a natural cause. But the difference is it is without purpose. It is without reason. It just happens randomly. So that guy who was inebriated and he unalived that girl, that happened because of natural causes. And there's no reason, there's no ultimate reason. And if we believe that we all evolved from, lower bacteria up to what we are today, then there is no ultimate value to human beings, only what we ascribe to them, which means that a culture that does not ascribe any value to human beings, they're not wrong objectively or ultimately because, we don't really have any value at the end of the day unless we are given by the society or culture. So it does not even change to reject God because you're still stuck with determinism in atheism and agnosticism.
You make a good point. There is though a notable difference. So, have you ever read up on or acknowledged the term nature versus nurture?
Yeah. That's why I said either natural causes or your upbringing.
Oh, but you said if it's according to your upbringing, then it's not hard determinism.
Actually, I think it could be argued as soft determinism because those are all your upbringing. Your upbringing is limited to natural causes, the actions of your parents, the environment, the things you went through. All of those things can be identified as natural things, natural causes. So everything you do is within a causal chain. And that causal chain is a natural causal chain. And hence, everything you do was caused by something else. Everything. So in that system, everything that you do is without a purpose. It's just a random occurrence from natural causes, whether upbringing or whether nature or nurture, both of them.
I'm not sure how that makes it into determinism. So, for example, I was going to understand your soft determinism outcome with I'm not a psychologist. I've taken one class, but so there's a chance. I've heard this. There's a genetic predisposition to be addicted to some substance.
Yeah.
So yeah, this could be, for example, I'd be, that's deterministic. That's your brain chemicals and your genetics, making you like, you're not choosing to be addicted to the substance. It's like your brain chemistry and everything is determining you to be, kind of. So I see where you're going with that, but how are you saying that because everything is a result of natural causes, therefore determinism?
All right, let me see how I could put it. I don't know if this is your position, but naturalists, logical positivists, and physicalists, it is their opinion and their perspective that all of your words, all of your actions, all of your thoughts come directly from your brain states, I don't have a reason to disagree with that. I just go a little bit further and say that God ordains our brain states to be a certain way, to have us do certain things to fulfill his purposes. But they stop right there at brain states. And even now, as I am speaking, my brain is operating. Every time I move my hand, every time I move my leg, my brain is causing me to do these things. But I also have to accept that my brain is going through chemical reactions right now. And the reason why I would say that hard determinism does not, get absolved or is escaped by saying, hey, nurture, is because how you are nurtured still reduces down to what your brain states cause you to do. And your nurturing can create a particular disposition that causes your brain states to be a certain way. And it always comes down to, hey, your brain states. And then you ask the question, what caused that particular chemical reaction in your brain to cause your particular word, your particular thought, and your particular action? Which means that, from my perspective at least, and I could be wrong about this and I could be corrected, everything you do, if you say God doesn't exist, is a result of your brain states. And this comes down to, could you have done otherwise, all things being equal? No, because it's your brain. It caused you to do what you did.
So you can't choose what you do with your brain? For example, I can't choose to raise my arm right now?
I would say that your choosing to raise your arm right now is a direct result of what your brain did. I wouldn't say that you can control your brain. I would say that in the worldview of a naturalist, you are your brain, because your brain contains your consciousness. If you believe in consciousness, I don't know, but you are your brain. So you can't control the thing that you are, because you are the brain. You would have to actually go beyond your brain to control your brain, if you get what I'm saying. I don't know what your perspective is logical, but if in naturalism, you are your brain. So anything that happens that you do is a result of your brain, not a result of what you do with your brain, but rather your brain itself.
I'm reluctant to accept that, but you are your brain seems a little bit of a...
Okay, what would you say different? What would you say different? If you are not your brain, because in our perspective as Christians, we would say that we are a soul and the brain is a tool that our soul uses. And that tool can be compromised by an accident. That tool can be compromised by boxing.
The brain is a tool as well.
Sorry?
Is the brain not a tool as well?
That's what I said. That's what I said. I would say in our worldview as Christians, we would say that our brain is a tool used by our soul, because we believe that the soul exists. But the tool can be compromised by an accident, brain surgery, boxing for too long, and it could cause you to act a certain way because of the tool's damage. But removing the soul out of this, in a different worldview, there is no soul. If you are not your brain, what are you? If the brain is something that is like something that's not you, if I'm asking the right question.
Yeah, I think this is gonna, it seems you're read up on this. I've taken one psychology class, but it seems to me that there is a difference between my brain telling my arm to go up versus me telling my brain all right, let me repeat that. It seems there's a difference between my brain telling my arm to go up versus me telling my arm to go up. It would be me telling my brain to do that.
All right.
Because there's a lot of different factors between person and a mind. I feel like there's a difference between, would you agree with that? There's a difference between a person and a mind?
In my perspective, we say that the mind is the soul and the brain is the tool of the mind or the tool of the soul. But you said something just now that that really made me curious. When you say that you think there's a difference between your brain causing your hand to move versus me causing my hand to move, I would have to ask you, what's the me in the sentence?
Me causing,
what's
me would be me as a person, right? So all of my experiences, all of my memories, what makes me as a person, my upbringing.
All right. What's the essence? What's the essence and nature of the person that's not the brain in your worldview? Because I don't know.
Everything that I just outlaid, my experiences, my memories, my upbringing, etc.
But wouldn't you say that all of your experiences, your memories, your upbringing, all of those are literally...
They are not the brain, rather they are contained in the brain. So I feel like there's a good...
Right. So they're contained in the brain, and as a result of them being contained...
Consciousness, but... That's a big debate.
Yeah, I know. That's why I didn't want to get there, because, in our worldview, the consciousness is the soul, the mind, and the brain is the tool. But I'm
definitely not going to say that consciousness is contained in the brain just yet. I'm not.
Yeah. There is the hard problem of consciousness, about the atom, one atom not having consciousness, but a group of atoms having consciousness. There's a problem there. I don't know how you deal with that, but I'm not going to get on that. What I want to ascertain is, what is the me? What is the I in the sentence? Like, I am doing X. I am going down there. So if the I is memories, experiences, and memories and experiences, but you also agree that those memories and experiences are contained in the brain, and then you do things, biologically. Everybody can say that you do things. There are literal reactions happening in your brain as you do things. How do you make the disconnect from it is your brain doing X versus you doing X when you are your memories and your states that are all contained in the brain?
I don't breathe. I don't make my heart beat. Yet I choose to go on a TikTok live and talk to you.
No, you don't. You don't choose to make your heart beat because it has been biologically discovered that your heart does those things on its own, but it all comes from the cerebellum. It all comes from the brain. Where I would say that God has wired certain things in our bodies to operate on their own, but your brain is still operating. That is why when someone is even sleeping, their brain is still working. You know that your brain never stops working?
You don't affirm the existence of like the autonomic nervous system?
Yeah, I do. I do affirm that. I do affirm that. But isn't the autonomic nervous system founded upon the operations of the brain?
Yeah, it seemed to me like you were saying that like God makes your heart beat automatically or something.
No. I guess I have to word my sentences better. What I'm saying is, our very makeup as human beings, our nervous system, our skeletal system, our muscular system, everything was created by God, and God created and sustains everything, and we can actually look at ourselves and discover how God sustains us, how God keeps us in existence. Because Hebrews chapter 1 verse 3 says that God upholds all things by the word of his power. That's why we believe that there are no such thing as brute facts, and that everything has a reason, and that reason is God. So when I think about, what has been discovered by biology, by science, about a human body, anatomy, sorry, what?
Isn't God a brute fact though?
Oh, no. A brute fact is something without a reason. And God actually gives us the reason for his existence in his revelation. So not even God is without a reason for his existence or without a reason for being. So a brute fact would be something that exists or is there without a reason and without explanation. That's the last definition I got from looking up a brute fact. So not even God is a brute fact. So I can't say... Huh?
I mean, this is kind of going on a loophole. I don't know if everyone. It's just, how is God supposed to explain his own existence unless he created himself or he was aware of, if he always existed, always there, right? How do you explain his existence other than he was always there? It seems that is the brute. The brute ends that God always existed.
How I explain it is by pointing to his revelation, in that when God revealed himself in his word, he shows us and reveals to us that he has always existed. Not the case that, okay, God just exists and we know nothing about him, we know nothing of him, we know no reason about him or whatever. But
that's not what a brute is.
Something without a reason. The reason why I said that God exists with a reason is because he is identified as the necessary being, and a necessary being, literally is explained in the statement "necessary being," in that this being, being exists.
That's just where I wanted you to go. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. This being exists because he's necessary. So once we add the word "because," is no longer a brute fact. In our analysis, at least, I don't know if there's a worldview out there that says, well, God is a brute fact, but in our worldview as Christians, the very statement "necessary being," that's the reason why he exists. But just going back though, what I was saying was, if you say that the word "me" is distinct from the brain, but the word "me" is defined as experiences and dispositions, but all of those things are located in the brain. How do you make the distinction between the me and the brain?
So just because if I have a cup, I fill it full of water, is that water now the cup?
Oh no. I think that would be disanalogous. I think that would be disanalogous. Okay, let me try to make it more plain. Okay, if the me is identified as experiences and dispositions, but the experiences and dispositions are in the brain, wouldn't the me be in the brain since the experiences and the me are identical?
Yeah, just like how the water is in the cup.
All right. So if the me is in the brain, wouldn't that logically entail that your brain encompasses you?
No, because the water doesn't encompass the cup.
But the cup encompasses the water.
Well, what do you mean by encompass?
The water contains the cup. The brain contains you.
Yeah, I'm fine to say it's a container, but
Okay.
when you say the brain is me, there's a difference. You know, the cup is the water versus the
All
cup
right.
contains the water.
All right, we're getting somewhere. So if the brain contains you, which is your experiences, your dispositions, wouldn't the brain be the ultimate cause for what you do?
That's a good question. So, would the brain be the cause for everything I do? So I can make choices based off of my experience, which are in the brain. Does that mean that the brain causes me? So okay, so
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm asking you if you think that's the entailment of what you said, and how is it not? That's what I'm saying. I'm not making any claims here. I'm actually asking because that's how my brain is working right now. I'm listening to you and I'm drawing logical entailments and trying to see if you agree with the entailments, because I think that if your brain contains you, then your brain is the ultimate cause of what you do. But if you think different, then tell me how.
You know, I might not have a straight answer for you right now.
And that's totally fine, man. You can always look into it and come back. We can have a dialogue because, as you can see, I'm very respectful. I'll let you speak. I'll let you finish so that you can, we can flush out everything that we have to discuss, because I'm really interested.
On that question, I might get back to you. Can you repeat the question?
So
just repeat the question.
So the question is, if your brain contains the me, and the me is your experiences and your dispositions, how is it not the case that your brain is the ultimate cause of what the me does or what you do? How is it not the case?
Yeah, it'd be weird kind of having to prove that the me is separate from the brain, though it's contained. I'd have to put that into I'd have to use some, a little bit of brain work there. But,
yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, because in my analysis, bro, like if I did not believe in God, I would say that I am my brain. That's how I would have thought, that I am my brain and everything that everybody does is a result of their brain. That's what I would think. But I'm only speaking hypothetically if I was an atheist or I said there is no God. But there could be somebody who thinks differently than I would and could actually articulate how it makes sense. And I'll be like, okay, I can see that. I can understand that. And then change my perspective. But thus far, bro, I think that without God, all you are is your brain. And whatever your brain does, that's you. And if your brain is literally, as has been proven, chemical reactions, then everything you do is a result of a chemical reaction. And chemical reactions don't carry with them any moral value. They don't carry with them any love. Don't carry with them any kindness, because I cannot make a chemical reaction produce any of that stuff. So everything that happens is ultimately just chemical reactions. Is it love? No, it's a chemical reaction. Is it kindness? No, it's chemical reaction. Is it care? No, it's chemical reaction. Is it schmurder? No, it's just chemical reaction. Is it grape? No, it's just chemical reaction. These would just be
have naturalistic explanations.
These would just be, you know what, our classification and nomenclature that we add on to chemical reactions. So when a man forces himself on a woman and grapes her, we call that grape, in that we identify the chemical reaction as grape. But ultimately, it's just a chemical reaction. That's how I would think, but I could be corrected. I could be corrected.
Yeah, I was going to ask you earlier. So, do you believe in your worldview for God to be all good? 'Cause it seems to me, or maximally good. It seems to me that sort of a God would always want to actualize a world in which the maximum amount of goodness can happen or occur. Given free. I'll give you free will. I'll give you evils caused by human free will. Sure, maybe free will is just such a great value that it's it justifies all the human evils. Sure, but well, first, just to answer the first question, do you think you're in your worldview that God is all good or maximally good, great, something like that?
Yeah, I actually do, and hence the name, logical problem of evil. I knew you were going to go there eventually if you didn't go there. So the logical problem of evil, I believe, is only a problem for people who believe in free will. That's where the logical problem actually comes up, because let's use the mustache man. God knew that by giving the mustache man free will, the mustache man would unalive 6 million Jews. He knew that. Did God do that? And can God do something like that and still be all good, all loving, all caring? And if he's all powerful, then he can stop it, i.e. he gave free will and he knew what was going to happen. So because he's all powerful, logical, he can stop it. Because he's all good, he would want to stop it. And because he's all knowing, he knew what was going to be the result, but he didn't do it. He didn't stop it. So if he didn't stop it, then he's not all good. If he couldn't stop it, then he's not all powerful. And if he didn't know it was going to happen, then he's not all knowing. And right there, because of free will, you have proven the non-existence of the omniscient, omnipotent, and omnibenevolent God. You've just proven his non-existence. But that's not my problem, buddy, because I'm a Calvinist. I'm not a guy who believes in free will. So the logical problem of evil is not a problem for me, because God ordains evil. He uses evil in that. And I love what R.C. Sproul said about this. He says, and I'm going to say this very slowly so you can get what I'm saying, because it was very technical for me to get it when I heard it first time. Evil is not good, but it is good that there is evil. I'm going to say it again. Evil is not good, but it is good that there is evil. If it was bad, then there would never be evil.
I thought, so does evil exist to you? Or, I mean, I just posit evil usually just to be, the lack of good.
Yeah. That the Bible identifies evil as lawlessness and deviations from God's will. So if I define evil in that way, just to have the word defined out, I would say it is not good. To break God's law, to deviate from his prescriptive will is not good, but it is good that there is the breaking of God's law and the deviations from his law. Because if it wasn't good for there to be deviations from God's law and deviations from his will, then there would never be deviations from his will. And we see in the Bible where God, and the passage I read to you in Acts chapter 4, where the most evil action that ever took place in human history, according to Presbyterians and Calvinists, was ordained by God, in that it specifically says they did exactly what your hand and your purpose predestined to occur. What was the reason for the unalignment of Christ in our worldview? To save a countless number of people who would ever believe in salvation in Jesus Christ. So we see that, and we can reconcile evil being there as a good that God ordains. It makes sense in our worldview for an all-knowing God, in that he knew exactly what would happen, an omnipotent God who does not want to stop evil right now, but he will stop it in the end, and an all-good God, in that God ordains evil for an ultimate good, which is to glorify himself. It makes sense to me when we take out the free will myth.
So earlier when we were talking, you said something. So when I mentioned, okay, so you said the decrees are not good. Decrees cannot be justified. Now with this quote you're bringing up, it seems like those decrees, those decrees are good. So
I actually made a distinction earlier. The distinction I made was that the person making the decree um, determines the goodness of the decree, but what was decreed, the action, is evil. So the decree is good because of the person who decrees it, but the act is not good. It's evil because of what was done, what took place. We have a lot of examples that we could go to in the Bible, like Joseph's story and Jesus Christ's murder.
Is the decree not the act, or I thought the decree was the act. So the act of running over the little girl is the decree.
No.
Is the decree?
The decree is the plan. The decree is the plan. In that, in our worldview, and you probably know about this because you read in philosophy. There's the A theory, B theory, and C theory of time. Ever heard of that?
Not the C theory.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So you or the A theory, which is essentially, if I'm remembering correctly, that there is only the present,
Yeah.
and the B theory is that only the present and the past. Only the present and the past exist. And the C theory of time is that there is an eternal now of past, present, and future. Eternal now. Or there exists past, present, and future. And when you actually flush all three of them out, there are people out there who literally believe that there is only the present. The past no longer exists, and the future does not exist. We only have now. You always hear people talking about, hey, you only have now. Live it up, man. You only have right now. and the B theory, they would say the past exists because you have memories of the past, and the present exists because you're here right now. But the future does not exist until it happens. The C theory, which is the theory that I hold to, and every Christian has held to, classical theism on time, is that there is an eternal now, and that eternal now is in the plan of God. In that God decrees the very fabric of time, and He is seeing simultaneously the past, the present, and the end. And that entire fabric of time was created by Him by His decree. And that plan that has been created by Him, everything that He wants to take place in that time also includes His actions in time, in that the author has literally written himself in the story. It
seems that's a result from His omniscience, His all-knowingness, rather than a decree.
Actually, I'm glad you said that. What we say is that time itself is a result of God's decree, and God's omniscience is a result of God's decree, in that God knows what will happen because He has decreed what will happen. It is not the case that what has been decreed came before what has been decreed came before the omniscience, in that everything that has ever happened in human history and will happen in human history exists ontologically on its own somewhere out there, and God simply observes it and sees what's going to happen, and that's how He knows what's going to happen. No, it's actually, and I forgot the wording in theology, the logical order and stuff like that, but I would have to get back into my reading to actually have the nomenclature. Oh, just remember it. It's called supralapsarianism and infralapsarianism. Would have to explain those, but just to get to the point. The point is that God does not know the future because He looked at it, and the future exists ontologically somewhere out there, and He looks at it and then learns what will happen. And then as a result, He decides how He's going to act, how He's going to react, and how He's going to, wire it to His purpose. But rather, God knows what will happen because He wrote the story. And that story is a theater of glory. That story also includes his actions, and it is ultimately to glorify himself. So every instance of evil, every instance of kindness, every act of slavery, every act of good, it is in the story God wrote, and he will glorify himself in the end. So, man, I'm losing my train of thought here as I'm talking. I hope that
I could probably poke holes in that, but because there are so many, I mean, usually I talk to, Protestants or whatever, Catholics, or just like, free will, you know what I mean? So, I mean, I could probably try to argue, but to take it to the point where I usually go, is, it's going to be, the problem of animal pain and suffering. And just to clarify before I get into the whole shtick is, do you think that when an animal feels pain or suffers, is that a bad thing?
That's a good question. Hold on, I'm trying to remember the answer that I had before. When an animal feels pain, is it a bad thing? I would say it depends, because not all pain is bad. If you injected an animal with a medication, that injection is painful, but the medication saved the life of the animal. So I would say that pain is not intrinsically bad. I would say that evil is bad, but pain is not intrinsically bad. And pain is not necessarily evil. So that's how I would answer that. I think it depends on what the intention of the pain is.
So I thought we agreed on this. So when we were talking about the greater good, when we were talking about I could, unalive, baby mustache man, that would be a bad thing, but it would lead to a greater good of, saving 6 million people. So that instance of me, unaliving a baby, that would be a bad thing, even though it leads to a greater good.
Yeah.
That situation, maybe you could say, is overall good, but just because the situation is overall good doesn't mean that the bad thing of unaliving a baby gets any better.
Yeah, but what I would throw on that is the pain that you inflicted on the baby resulted in the unalivement of the baby, whereas the pain inflicted on the animal that I was making a reference to was to save the animal's life. So it wouldn't be good. But if pain is the standard, then pain is not always bad, because it will be determined by the result. If the pain resulted in the unalivement of baby mustache man, then of course you did something evil. But if the pain you inflicted on mustache man was to kill a mosquito on his arm, slapping the baby's arm to kill the mosquito, that caused the baby some pain, but, it's not bad pain. It's not bad. That's what I was pointing out, that there's a distinction there. So if you are going to go with, is animal pain good or bad, I would say animal pain is bad if it results in their unalivement, if they pass away. And you're describing animal as human beings, because that's how it usually goes. Human beings are animals, just like every other animal. If it results in the unalivement of the human being, then it's bad. It's wrong. It's schmurder. It's wrong. But if the pain resulted in the human being, living longer, to do something that would, hurt for a while, but, was for their greater good. Like when I was doing martial arts when I was 17, I got punched in the face a lot of times, but as a result, I know how to fight really good, intentions, results, and stuff.
Let's separate this from human beings. So, to clarify a little more, I think I'm a little still confused. So, what is wrong with me punching a dog in the face?
Oh, nothing. I wouldn't say anything is wrong with harming animals. In our worldview as Christians, only human beings have inherent value, dignity, and worth. Every other being, every other entity has ascribed value, and that will be determined on the culture. Because here in Jamaica, if you run over a dog, there is no penalty.
Yeah, I think for now we're just probably going to fundamentally disagree on that.
Yeah.
Why? And then it's going to be, because I'm not morally, I don't have a chosen moral philosophy yet. I'm definitely studying still.
Damn, there's this person who says we eat dogs in some parts of Nigeria. Bro, I think it all depends on where you live. I mean, goodness. I would never eat a dog. We don't eat dogs here in Jamaica. We find it repulsive. we don't eat dogs here, but we run over dogs here. I mean, we have a lot of stray dogs here in Jamaica, and they roam the streets, and sometimes they go out on the street and they get run over. There is no penalty. But if a dog is run over in America, now there's some problems because you could go to jail for that stuff. I heard. I don't know. You're not allowed. There's animal rights over there, right? If I'm being
Well, if you run over a dog, it's not. I mean, the dog that ran in front of you. I mean, maybe you might. The owner of the dog could sue you, maybe, and somehow try to win if they had a good lawyer.
Yeah.
It's not. It's illegal to abuse an animal on purpose.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Yeah.
we don't have that here in Jamaica. People abuse animals here in Jamaica all the time, and there's no penalty. I mean, a police car could be driving by and you're eating food and a dog came up to you and you want a dog to get the hell away from you, and you take a stone or you take a stick and you hit that dog to get it away from you, and nothing. There's no penalty. The police do nothing because in America it is cultural. It is cultural. But if we expand that out and we say humans don't have inherent value, dignity, and worth, they only have the worth and the value we ascribe to them like any other animal, then it is not wrong if in a culture human beings have no value and they are treated as such. It is not wrong because the worldview would dictate that. If that's your worldview, I don't know.
Let's take the example of the abused dog shelter. There's dogs, refusing to eat, completely in fear of humans. There's dogs sitting in a corner, turned away, staring at a wall 24/7. They can't sleep. They're shaking all the time. You don't see these as, objective cases of, what's the word?
Evil? Wrongdoing?
No, not evil.
Bad?
Suffering you can account for. So you said you can't account for animal pain. I mean, is all just going to end up because they don't have a soul?
In our worldview, yeah. In our world, well, actually, there are scriptures that speak about soul and animals having souls as well. But the Christian,
you can't suffer without a soul.
Well, actually, in our worldview as Christians, we do believe that animals have souls. We just don't believe that they have inherent value, dignity, and worth, because that is reserved to image bearers of God, and those are human beings. But just to push back on that just for a little bit, the same way that you could point to a chicken farm, and chickens being used for food and used for sustenance of human beings, and we could point to pig farms and cow farms. They're all animals just like dogs, and they all experience pain and suffering just like dogs. But I, as a Christian, I don't see those things as morally reprehensible, evil, or bad, because they're not made in God's image. They're not image bearers of God. So whereas I can feel some empathy and sympathy for a dog because they're so cute, when they're puppies and they're suffering in a shelter, I can feel some empathy and sympathy for a dog, and probably even be, led to adopting a dog and, taking care of it. It's still, at the end of the day, according to my worldview, does not entail that the dog has inherent value, dignity, and worth. It only has the worth I ascribe to it. That's all it has. But a worldview where Christian theism is not true, that's a worldview where every animal, because everybody is an animal in that worldview, every animal, the value they have is what was prescribed and ascribed to them. It's a call coming in. Hold on. Auntie?
Yeah.
Hey, Auntie.
All right, just letting you know, there's going to be a big delay on the road, so I might be later than expected. So just know what you're doing, in the sense that if you're having a family out there, you know
problem.
what you do.
No problem.
All right.
See you soon.
There's a truck. There's a big truck turning over.
Hey, buddy, are you there? Hello? Hey, Logical, you there? Hey, another call came in. Okay, he left. All right, so everybody, I gotta go. Wait, ape boy for life. Oh boy. All right, ape boy. I'm not an ape. I don't believe that stuff. But to each his own. I gotta go, guys. Another call came in, and I got an emergency. I gotta run. So thank you guys so much for watching. Thanks for coming up, and give me a follow, everybody. And let's talk again. This was a blessing as always. Of course, Seth. Bless you too, man. Um, the topic was, biblical slavery properly understood, which is that God's ideal is freedom, and it was always God's intention for everyone to be free and for slavery to, not be there. But it was used by God as a means to glorify himself by showing the picture of Christ and his relationship to his people, Lord and doulos, Lord and slave. But thank you guys for coming. Thank you guys for watching. Everybody on YouTube, God bless you. God bless you. Thanks for coming. Thanks for watching. I got to go. Got an emergency. Until next time. And to you, YouTube again, thanks for watching. Thanks for coming. Got to go. Talk soon.